Hello, it's my job to interrupt you all while you're having wonderful conversations. We hope you've enjoyed the conference so far, and as someone who's come to their first conference, I want to thank you for all the wonderful conversations and the friendships that people have reached out with. Part of having a good time for all of us is about having good food. We want to thank all the people that grew the food, but also the people here in the convention center who cooked it and served it for us. So if you could join me in giving them a round of applause. We also want to give one last big thanks to our conference sponsors. You are all amazing, you're plentiful, and you have helped make this happen. A special call out to Human Links Foundation, Cloudview Farms, Snohomish County Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Badger Mountain Winery, Cascadia Produce, King County, Washington Farmland Trust, the WSDA Regional Markets, and WSU Food Systems. We really appreciate and acknowledge the help that this has made to running this conference, for many of us, the first in-person conference for some time. We also appreciate our trade show partners this year, and I know lots of you are going home with cute little goodies in your bags. We've been so pleased to be able to offer Spanish interpretation for sessions across the conference. Again, if you could join me in thanking Malaquis Flores, Maribel Garcia Flores, Donna Bronstein, and Gwen Vernon. And I want to thank you for continuing to prioritize the health and safety of all attendees, as well as Tilth Alliance and Convention Center staff. So keep remembering to wear your mask at all times, except when actively eating or drinking or speaking into a microphone. In your conference bags, you've got a very large piece of paper, which is the evaluation for the conference. It means so much to us to get your feedback. Please, please complete these and drop them off at reception before you go. Your next session will also have an evaluation, but that's just for that session. These conference hall evaluations really will help inform next year's events and those that follow. We want to acknowledge that some of our farming community up in Skagit and Whatcom County have been really hard hit by the rains this past week, and many are dealing with severe flooding. There's some GoFundMes that have been set up by community members to support some of these farms. There's slips at each table with QR codes, but also you can pop to reception and find that. I've been so touched by the way this community supports each other. And finally, I get to introduce Gwen Vernon, who's going to come up and tell you what happens next.
Thanks, Gail. I am introducing our keynote speaker. It is my great pleasure to introduce Katherine Unn. Katherine is the Director of Organizing and Advocacy for the National Young Farmers Coalition and works from her home in rural Meha Valley, Washington. When I was asked to introduce Katherine, I reached out to a mutual friend in the Meha, Alyssa Umars, some of you may know her, to ask for help because I don't, until today, don't know Katherine myself. I knew that I could talk about her impressive professional and educational background from her bio, which includes a bachelor's in American Studies and biology from Tufts, a master's in veterinary health from the Royal Veterinary College in London, and experience working for the French Institute of Agricultural Research, as well as a US nonprofit focused on creating fair markets for farmers. But I wanted to know who Katherine really was, so I asked Alyssa to tell me something that I wouldn't find in a standard bio. And this is what she told me. I don't think many folks know that Katherine Unn is a tough-as-nails horsewoman. She's been packing people and horses into the Pasayten wilderness, which is over near the Met House, since she was a teenager. When she's not at the office, you're probably going to find her riding the trails, training a green horse for someone, or giving riding lessons. I think if you watch Katherine around horses, it gives you a good sense of who she really is and why she's such a force of nature when it comes to her professional work. The best horse people are really keen observers, quietly taking in what the horse can tell them. They are patient, kind, and steady. But when it comes time to act, they move decisively, confidently, and at exactly the right time. Katherine is the best horsewoman I know. She's afraid of nothing, except maybe public speaking. I've seen her come off a horse, take a deep breath, and get right back on. So those were Alyssa's words. Beautiful words. And as I reflect on what she shared with me about Katherine, I think about how incredibly lucky we are to have leaders like her showing us how to be all at once fearless, strategic, and kind. I'm so grateful to Katherine for joining us and sharing her vision for a bright, resilient, just, and sustainable future for agriculture, starting now. So welcome, Katherine, to the stage.
I want to thank Gwen and Alyssa for that enormously generous introduction. I count myself incredibly lucky to be a guest in this beautiful state and to have the privilege to call the Pasayten Wilderness my playground. I want to extend also a gratitude to the Tilth Alliance for translating this presentation and want to extend a special greeting to those joining us in Spanish. El sistema agrícola y alimentario de este país debe reconocer la humanidad y la dignidad de todos, así como debe apreciar y hacer espacio para la creatividad y el conocimiento especial de los que inmigran aquí. Gracias por escuchar mi presentación. There are cards and pens at each table. Please hold your questions for the end. Write them on the cards. We'll gather all of them, and I'll answer the ones that we have time for. As Gwen said, I am the Organizing and Advocacy Director with the National Young Farmers Coalition. We are a network of 200,000 farmers, ranchers, and supporters. We work daily from the belief that we have only one generation left to transform agriculture in the service of our communities and our lands. And we are that generation. We are farmers and ranchers who steward the struggle to transform agriculture. We envision a just future where farming is free of racial violence, accessible to communities, oriented towards environmental well-being, and concerned with health over profit. We shift power and change policy to equitably resource our next generation of working farmers. Young Farmers has a well-defined niche in the fight for a more just and sustainable agricultural system. We address the barriers that young and BIPOC farmers face, barriers that have been sharpening this year with land prices out of reach, climate pressures threatening the viability of farm careers, and USDA programs continuously out of reach. We address these barriers through bringing bold ideas to policymakers while being practical in our approach and considering feasibility in all of our campaigns. Our flagship annual leadership development event, the Young Farmers National Leadership Convergence, last week, was a good example of the balance between bold ideas and feasible policy. The week focused on supporting farmer-led, anti-racist projects in their local communities. We had farmers bring projects like local food sheds that were meant to address food security in communities that needed food. We had projects that wanted to use their farms as a community healing space. We had projects that were meant to work towards collective land ownership. While supporting these grassroots projects and capacitating them with more knowledge and more resources, the event also included important advocacy opportunities with the White House, the head of the Farm Service Agency, and the USDA secretary. Our farmers met these appointed officials to ask tough questions on climate change, land access, and racial equity. But we also positioned ourselves as partners to enact change, and we positioned farmers as the expert in what is needed for a more equitable farm future. This positionality, a radical, bold vision, paired with a practical approach to policy change, has served young farmers well when it comes to winning structural change. In the last Farm Bill, the Farm Bill of 2018, young farmers supported and saw through $5 million towards beginning farmer training and outreach programs. And we saw through a microloan program designed specifically for young farmers and available now in every county of the country. More recently, and outside of the Farm Bill, we advocated and got COVID relief that was much more accessible and available for young farmers. A particularly important campaign at Young Farmers is the Campaign for Accessible Farmland. Access to land is the #1 challenge facing the next generation of farmers in the United States. Of the advocacy issues I've worked on, it's been the biggest and most complex one because it's difficult to pinpoint one single wrongdoer. Don't get me wrong, I've absolutely loved those gritty campaigns where we get to pursue a company till they correct their behavior. The difference with working on land justice is that we're working to dismantle a system tied up in a long history of discrimination that privileged profit over communities and sustainability. The inaccessibility of land has bad actors, but no real tangible driving perpetrator. It has come to a point where the system is pervasive and self-feeding. You might already know the histories and stories of this possession of farmland that I'm about to bring into this room, but I want to invite them in once again because they should be grounding us in all of our work to transform our agricultural system. This recounting is not meant to be comprehensive. It's just a small collection of the stories that really pivoted my understanding of the system that we operate in. In January of 1865, Union General William Sherman signed the Special Field Order No. 15. The federal government planned radical reparations to former slaves. It planned to redistribute some 400,000 acres formerly owned by Confederate landowners to former black slaves in an effort known to most who were schooled in this country as 40 acres and a mule. But then, in the fall of 1865, President Andrew Johnson, President Lincoln's successor and a sympathizer with the South, overturned the order and returned the land to the planters who had controlled it before the war. Followed close to a century of pervasive sharecropping. Sharecropping is a system where the landlord allows a tenant to use the land in exchange for a share of the crop. It's a deeply unfair and inhumane system that became equivalent to indentured servitude and was propped up by laws that consistently favored landowners and protected them. It's a single example amongst many racial violence, intimidation, discrimination through law, like heirs property challenges. It's a single example that explains how today Black people own less than 1% of rural lands in the United States. In 1887, Congress passed the General Allotment Act, also known as the Dawes Act, a moment in history where our government put in law their prejudice of the Indian way of life and collective use of land. The Dawes Act allowed the federal government to survey Indian tribal land and divide the area into allotments, into tracts of land for individuals and families. Members of the selected tribes or reservations were sometimes given permission to select the pre-divided pieces of land for themselves and their children. Sometimes the tracts were assigned by the government representatives. If the amount of reservation land exceeded the amount needed for allotment, the federal government could negotiate the purchase of the land from the tribes and sell it to non-Indian settlers. As a result, 60 million acres were either ceded outright or sold to the government for non-Indian homesteaders or corporations as what was called surplus land. In 1942, we saw the birth of the Bracero program, which brought 4.6 million Mexican guest workers to the United States on short-term, primarily agricultural labor contracts. The program was plagued with discriminatory practices, such as charges for room and board and work penalties through deducted pay. But more than abuse, it meant that for 2 decades, the United States farm and food system benefited from the labor of 4.6 million men who were not allowed to stay in the country. The United States benefited from labor while reneging the American dream of working hard to be allowed to stay on the land and succeed economically. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order number 9066, which led all Japanese Americans on the West Coast to be forced from their homes and businesses during World War II and incarcerated. Before the war, nearly 2/3 of West Coast Japanese Americans worked in agriculture. By 1940, they grew almost 40% of the vegetables in California. The United States capitalized on this vast farming expertise by having working farms in each incarceration camp. The Tule Lake camp, on its own, produced over 2 million pounds of grain and hay. Some former incarcerees returned home and eventually rebuilt successful businesses, but most returned home to overgrown or stolen land and stolen equipment. By 1960, the number of Japanese American farmers had dropped to 1/4 of their pre-war presence. The system that we have settled in is one of consolidated economic and political power. 98% of farmland is owned by white farmers. 8% of farms own 40% of US farmland. And while it is extremely inequitable towards BIPOC farmers, the consolidation in today's system no more serves white farmers. The history I described was driven as much by racial injustice as it was by the consolidation of wealth and land towards a small class of non-working, wealthy shareholders. Most farmers today, BIPOC and white, no matter how they farm, are at the losing end of an agricultural system designed to maximize profits for stockholders in agribusiness companies, from farm equipment, seeds and fertilizers, to processing and distribution. The statistics on the loss and consolidation of farmlands is a glaring symptom of the siphoning of power, economic and political, in our farm and food systems. Shareholders across sectors get wealthier from US industries, including agribusiness. This wealth in stocks translates directly to the consolidation of farmland ownership. This was the lesson learned from the headlines this year about Bill Gates being the largest farmland owner in this country. The point is not that Bill Gates is farming. I'm guessing that Bill Gates didn't know, or at least didn't know about the details of his investment and therefore ownership of farmland. Simply but destructively, the point is that the ability to hold stocks begets farmland, not your work ethic, not your solutions to climate change, not your solutions to equity. At the same time that the Bill Gates of the world amass farmland, farmers are losing an acre a minute of farmland to urban sprawl. Over my presentation, we would have lost 60 acres. That's a beautiful and vast farm. Over this 3-day conference, we would have lost 4,320 acres. How many farms and farmers is that? Farmland access is deeply correlated to the unhealth of our agricultural system. As we lose farmland, we lose the next generation of farmers. Again and again, the next generation says that their number one challenge is accessing and maintaining farmland. As we lose the next generation, we lose the answers to our most pressing challenges. We lose our most creative, resilient, and promising voices for sustainability. My work at Young Farmers is to support the young farmer leaders across our country as they drive us towards a new agriculture and food system that is more just and more sustainable. Our members overwhelmingly farm using organic, regenerative, or other sustainable practices, and they sell their produce locally. Though they have inherited an economic system designed to maximize profits, they are structuring their farms to feed our communities. They offer the most innovative and hard-hitting models for addressing justice and sustainability in our farm and food systems. I could not be more impressed by the drive for better alternatives here in Washington. They are the true leaders here, not people like me. You have the local Washington Young Farmers chapter, who in 2017 and 2018 drove a state-based policy effort for HB 2671 to address farmer and farm worker mental health. That effort sparked similar actions across other states and even at the federal level. You have folks like Vero Vergara and Caitlin Ehlers. They are pulling together a project called Groundwork. Groundwork is a multiracial, cross-sectoral effort to address food apartheid. It serves King County and the western region of Washington by connecting the next generation of sustainability and equity-focused farmers with communities in need of culturally competent food options and programs. They use the existing community health and nutrition infrastructure, like health clinics or maternal infant programs, as the meeting point for farmers and consumers. All this while applying an anti-oppressive political education lens that organizes farmers, consumers, and health and nutrition program providers to change our farm, food, and public health systems in depth through organizing and advocacy. This project is unique because it responds to 4 current urgent challenges with one solution. It unlocks markets for young BIPOC farmers while allowing them to continue growing the foods that they want to grow for the communities that they want to feed. It responds to discrimination in our food systems by providing the food option that folks want to see at affordable prices brought directly to the community. It responds to the need for a holistic, one-stop shop and culturally competent approach to community health and nutrition programming. And finally, it responds to the need for a shift of power through leadership and advocacy development amongst farmers, consumers, and provider networks by providing political education throughout the programming. Caitlin, Vero, and their partners are young BIPOC farmers who do this work because they see no other options. Were our farm and food system meeting the needs of farmers and consumers? Caitlin says she'd have 2 kids, grow vegetables, and become a scholar of Spinoza. Were our farm and food system meeting the needs of our farmers and consumers? Vero said they'd be farming with ease at a pace not possible in the current system. They would be a beloved cook at a self-managed community kitchen and co-directing a community food system production and distribution effort. They would be on the board of the local cooperative school system, and they would be continually studying and doing conflict work within our farm and food sector. These are Caitlin and Vero's dreams. I'm sure if we asked the Washington Young Farmer chapter, their dreams for what they would be doing right now would be similar. The young farmers leaders in your state are folks who are lending their time, resources, creativity, and leadership above and beyond their farming time to solve our most pressing social challenges. What I'm trying to say is that you already have the creativity and expertise and leadership that you need for a bright farm future right here in your state. As I witness the passion and creativity of this next generation, I am convinced that what the next generation needs is not more support for farms, not more support on their farms, not better models, not help with new techniques, not new ideas. What they need is quite literally more space. 75% of the next generation in agriculture told us that they did not grow up on a farm. Yet the USDA estimates that less than a quarter of farmland, estimated to change hands in the next 4 years, will be made available to non-relatives. For there to still be farmer leaders in our Washington Young Farmer chapter, in Groundwork, in Tilth, we must address the farmland access challenge. As we lose an acre of farmland a minute, what then is the answer to supporting the next generation of farmers? What we need is historic, ambitious policy change. And we have the perfect window of opportunity. Every 5 years or so, Congress takes up a massive piece of legislation known as the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill covers everything from supporting farmers to addressing food insecurity. It's an omnibus bill that's worth nearly $100 billion a year. $100 billion a year. The next Farm Bill will be reauthorized in 2023. This has to be the Farm Bill for the next generation in agriculture. It's the Farm Bill to address equitable farm policy, is the Farm Bill to address sustainability, is the Farm Bill to address land access. And we need to be addressing all of these issues with the urgency that the next generation of farmers requires. That's why Young Farmers is launching the 1 Million Acres for the Future campaign. With our partners, we are calling on Congress to invest $2.5 billion in the 2023 Farm Bill to facilitate equitable access to 1 million acres of farmland for the next generation of farmers. $2.5 billion may sound big to you all. It's 0.3% of the Farm Bill. It's a small and attainable fraction of the money that will be put out there. And it is still more than all the existing programs specifically designed to help young farmers that currently exist. To win this change, we are building a coalition of partner organizations, engaging DC policymakers, and resourcing farmer advocates through 100 farmer land advocacy fellowships. We are asking Congress to take action to coordinate federal land access initiatives, eliminate inequities in land ownership and access, invest in voluntary, community-led farmland protection that keep lands in the hands of growers, expand access to credit and help farmers compete in the real estate market, support and incentivize farm transition, support farm viability for young farmers and farmers of color, and invest in data collection, reporting, and research on farmland tenure, ownership, and transition that will let us know whether we got to our 1 million acres. In short, we are asking for the comprehensive and bold change that is the historic answer to our deep history of inequity. Clearly, I'm passionate about supporting the next generation in agriculture, and I believe that we do that through equitable land access. I also believe that growing and buying sustainably and equitably is powerful, but insufficient to redress our agricultural and food systems. I believe that we need to shift power through policy change. Many of you will have your own beliefs about the future of farming and your own ideas of the change you want to see in the agricultural world. I want to give us some tips on how we can actually make the change that we want to see, no matter what your vision for the future of farming is. Making change can feel daunting and overwhelming. There's so much to do, and it feels like so little time to affect change. But what if I told you that advocating for change could be quick and easy? We're going to practice now. Congress is, at this moment, moving quickly to pass a budget reconciliation package. This package is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to win major investments in addressing climate change. This $1.75 billion climate and infrastructure bill could invest billions in helping farmers reduce greenhouse gas emissions, sequester carbon, and adapt to a changing climate. Much of this bold support for sustainable farming can be translated in farmland justice through future action in the Farm Bill. With this context in mind, I'm going to show you how we make change and how it can be as easy and quick as sending a text message. We're going to start right now. We're going to tell our elected officials that we want bold, equitable, and sustainable federal policy now. Take out your phone. I'm going to do it with you. Open your text messaging app, and you're going to text YF space climate to 40649. I know it's not a real phone number, it doesn't look like one, but it is, and it works. And I'm going to write it up so we can all do it at the same time. Once you send that text, and please do it now. There's a reason why we're doing it all at the same time. Once you send that text, you'll get a link back through your text messages. It opens a window, if you click on the link, it opens a window where you can email your senators. So if we're all from Washington, we're all emailing the same people at the same time right now. You can email your senators by scrolling to the bottom of that page and clicking Send Email. If you've clicked Send Email, then you've taken action. You've made your voice heard. And hopefully, we've inspired some elected officials to know that we're not going to leave that seat at the table empty. If we're not at the table, we're what's for dinner, right? By taking no less than a minute right now, you're there and you're at that table. You might ask me whether they care about our emails. Elected officials' strategy is driven by three forces: voters, campaign donations, and DC lobbying. Taking actions such as this one might feel trivial to you all, but it adds your voice to many others. It gives people in organizations like Young Farmers more power. There are some that can walk onto the Capitol and promise money or promise lucrative careers. With your support, we can walk onto the Capitol and hold our own because we can bring the weight of a significant number of potential voters with us. And the significant number of potential voters, they've just shown by clicking on 2 buttons and taking less than 1 minute that they care about a specific issue. Your email alone might not make much of an impact, but I promise you that the 100 emails that we just sent at the same time right now are enough to make our Washington senators think twice about the voter impact of not moving on climate today. Maybe you have more than a minute to give, and you want to get involved beyond digital actions. We'd love for you to become a spokesperson. Learn to tell your story and your community story in a way that compels our elected officials, but also the general public to take action. Take your story to the press, take it to your state capitol, take it to DC. But please don't act alone. If you tell your story tomorrow, people will hear it once from one person. If you work with an advocacy organization like ours, you add your voice, in our case, to 200,000 others. And we are there then to help make sure that your message comes through till it is heard. It doesn't have to be our organization. Thea yesterday in her keynote mentioned other organizations who do beautiful work too. HEAL, Soulfire, NEFOC, SELC. There are many of us there carrying the work of a brighter farm future. Find the vision that compels you the most, find the community that you trust the most, and add your voice to their collective cause. Some of you here might believe that your voice is not the one that needs to be highlighted. You might believe that it's time for white people to take less space and it's time to give the spotlight to BIPOC stories. There's truth in this thought, but I would ask you to consider carefully your position as an ally. An ally doesn't step back, they uplift. If you will not take an opportunity to speak about an issue, then consider carefully what else you will do. Take the example of the reconciliation effort we just sent emails about. We get further if you use your privilege to take an extra step and make sure actual, tangible policy change happens, than if you step back so much that in the end, your power went unused. You can take an action online, you can tell your story to press and elected officials. The last means of advocacy that I would like to talk about today is organizational. If you lead an organization, consider the collective power that you have to move structural change. Even if your organization's primary purpose is at the local level or to provide technical assistance. Getting involved in policy as an organization does not have to be complicated or time-intensive. I would say that if your primary purpose is not advocacy, you should not think of starting your own policy action. There are so many of us out there who have accumulated expertise in policy change. Consider first adding your organization's name and power to a pre-existing effort. It can be as simple as getting your organization to sign on to platforms such as Young Farmers' 1 Million Acre platform. Similar to taking digital action, signing onto another organization's platform might seem trivial, but it adds your voice to that of many other organizations. It allows organizations like us in DC to show that not just individuals care, but organizations and businesses support an issue, and it strengthens our voice in DC. If your organization wants to get involved further, consider what resources you might have to lend. The most obvious type of support is to fundraise for another organization, but there are other means to participate. You could help share digital campaigns with your network through your newsletter at your meetings. I spoke just a while ago about needing more farmers willing to tell their stories to advocate for policy change. Your organization could support identifying farmers who would be interested in becoming spokespeople and connecting them to existing campaigns. My point is, don't necessarily think as an organization that you have to reinvent the wheel. Just like individuals can have more impact if they tell their stories as part of an organized network, organizations can have more impact if they take action as part of a coalition. Before I close, I want us to do a very quick mini activity. I want you all to turn to your neighbor or neighbors, maybe groups of 2 or 3, and share one line of an issue in agriculture that you care deeply about and a simple action step that you're going to follow in 2022. And we'll spend about 4 minutes doing that. Let's come back together now, so we have plenty of time for questions. I'm glad to see that this is sparking so much conversation, and please take this conversation beyond this room and continue it. It's by talking to each other that you can define what 2022 is going to look like for you all, and that you can define the next step for advocacy and agriculture in Washington State. I want to close by saying that I believe deeply that farmers, ranchers, and land stewards can contribute to the transformation of society. Though we have inherited an economic system designed to maximize profits, we structure our farms to feed our communities. Motivated by the looming climate crisis, we farm for collective resilience. Despite farm policies that exclude us from participation, we organize and we persist. In carving out a space for ourselves to plant, cultivate, nurture, and feed, we are uniquely positioned to advocate for change and to get change in policy to create the transformation that we want to see for a brighter farm future. Please claim your seat at the table. Thank you. And we have some time left, and I would love to take questions. So please use the little cards and pens at your table, and we'll come around and collect some questions. Continue to keep the questions coming, and I'll answer the ones that I've got so far. Someone asked if they could contact Groundwork, the organization that I talked about and gave their story that's currently led by Vero and Caitlin. They don't have a website for more information about Groundwork quite yet. And what I'll ask you to do is, I'll put my email on the board. Please email me and I can connect you with them. But I think that the point of this story is that the folks that you all want in leadership are here already, and please do the work to connect. Make sure that you've done the work internally, that when you connect, you're ready, and then we'll connect you. That's a real email, and we're actually quite responsive, so don't hesitate to actually use it. And use it also if you have any questions about advocacy and organizing. That's our favorite topic, clearly, our favorite topic to talk about. The next question is not a question, but an observation. And I'm wondering, Eric, if you'd like to just share it with everyone nice and loud. And I'll extend the thanks to you all. I see many young farmers in the crowd, and like I said in my keynote, you all are the leaders, and you all should be up here keynoting too. Any other questions? Yeah, just go for it. Yeah. Thanks. Well, yeah, that's working too. We want to know what we can do about Bill Gates. The whole point of what I said is that it's not just Bill Gates, right? It's a system. It's not a system where you can point a finger. There's been many campaigns that I've been part of like that, like Tyson during the COVID, where they needed to address workers' rights in their plants. Land access is not just a question of hounding maybe that's not appropriate talk, of following Bill Gates and getting after him till he gives the land back. It's more complicated than that, right? He has folks working for him, investing money for him, and eventually it ends up in farmland ownership. The point is that what we can do is advocate in the next farm bill or advocate with your elected official for deep structural change and billions of dollars to get that money back. It's not as satisfying, I know, but believe me, it's what actually gets structural change. I think I got the acronym right, if people want to look them up. I think this question is about differences within a community, but if you recognize your question, please feel free to interrupt and correct me. The question says, do you find that within the community of farmers, there are vast differences in opinions and priorities? And the second part of the question is, and how do we share our stories within community, even here at this conference, to move us forward together? Are there vast differences in opinion and priorities within farming? I would say yes, just like there's vast differences in opinions and priorities in our country currently. We rally around land access, and let's do a show of hands. Who feels like land access, who felt like land access even before this talk or before Thea's talk was something that was really, really important and key to the future of farming and key to sustainability and equity in agriculture? Who believes in climate change? Sorry if I just brought up the... All right. Who thinks that student loans should go away for agriculture to succeed? Keep on going. Because if you have student loan debt, then you can't take on more debt, or you're hesitant to take on more debt, so you can't buy land, or you can't get on land. That's the 60-second version. One more. Who believes that the agricultural system is deeply inequitable, comes from a history of inequity, and wants to change it for our justice? Yeah, so there's a lot of differences of opinions between farmers, but it doesn't seem that hard. And thank you to Tilth for having brought this group together, to bring together a group where you'll find at least some common values. If you're talking about a smaller group and a smaller effort, we find that conflict is a major issue when campaigning with a smaller group. But I think grounding yourself in the values that started you all off as a group is what's really important. Having them written or in a place where you can remember them and refer back to them when you have an issue is really important. But you can see that it's not that hard to find grounding values. Where and how do we share our stories? That's a really complex question, right? There's the moment or the question that I brought up in the keynote of when is it the right time to bring up your story and when is it the right time to step back, right? If you're in front of an elected official and it's just you all in the room, then step up and speak and tell your story. If you're in this kind of room, then maybe make a quick analysis first. Is it time for someone else's story to be heard? Should you step back? Have you not spoken enough? Should you speak up? Hopefully that answers the question. Otherwise, how do you share your story? You all are farmers or farming adjacent. You're all allies. You can all relate, apparently, to climate, land, equity, student loans. So you all have the story. Just make sure you can make it snappy, like make it that 2-minute version, and that you have a clear ask at the end. The last question I think that we'll take was that someone, and thank you for the question, loved the question that I posed to Vero and Caitlin about what they would be doing if the system wasn't so broken. And they were curious about what I would be doing. I think my intro made it super clear that I'd probably be camping out in the mountains with my horses and wouldn't come down to town anymore. Thank you all, and thank you all for the work that you do.
Thank you very much, Katherine. I actually want to thank both Katherine and Thea for reminding us that we need to raise our voices. We all do share a lot of common values here in this room, and it's together, our voices and our stories, we need to bring them out of this room and make sure that they're being heard by the people who have the power to make the kind of change that we need to make. Land access is a key, but both Thea and Katherine made it clear that the issues are much, much, much bigger than just land access. Land access will bring people to the land who can begin to make some of those changes, but we also need to be heard in Washington, in Olympia. And so it takes courage to bring your stories and your voice to those areas. And this is where organizations like Katherine's can help and can support bringing those stories to the Capitol. And I also want to encourage you, we had a session on the coalition that we're working to build, the Coalition for Organic and Regenerative Agriculture, which will really be a coalition for farmers and the organic and regenerative community here in Washington to bring their voices to Olympia, and also to bring their voices to the National Young Farmers Union, to the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, to the Organic Trade Association, to all of those organizations who are lobbying and advocating for transformational change. So I encourage you to go to the website, which is www.cora-wa.org, and take a look at what it is that we're doing to organize here in Washington and to work to uplift all of our voices and make sure that they're being heard both at a state and national level in collaboration with like organizations. So thank you, Katherine, and thank you, Thea, if you're here in the room, for taking the time to be with us today and share your stories. I also want to thank all of the presenters. I know many of you aren't in the room right now, but hopefully if this is being streamed, you'll know how much we appreciate the time that you took to share your knowledge and your vision with us. And I know I got a lot out of going to the presentations that I went to, and I hope that all of you did as well. I'm already thinking about next year's conference. I know the staff is too. It's hard not to when you're in the middle of this and you're seeing how things are going. We're tentatively planning on holding it in the Tri-Cities next year, the Tri-City area. And we always have a conference advisory committee. We want as many voices on that committee as possible. So if you're interested in helping to plan next year's conference, plan the themes, think about the workshops. If you're interested in presenting, please get in touch with me or any of our staff. And we'll make sure that as we begin to build toward next year's conference that we are in touch with you and you are invited to the table. But give us a couple weeks to rest before you get in touch. That would be good. So we're moving toward the end. There's one more session, but I just wanted to say thank you, and I look forward to seeing all of you next year. And yes. It's cora-wa.org. All right. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.